The grill flames rose higher than usual when the door opened. Stanley Nicholas didn't look up at first. There were 15 tickets hanging above the flat top, grease popping, buns toasting, the lunch rush moving at the controlled velocity of a kitchen that knows exactly what it's doing. The room smelled like caramelized onions and charred beef, and the particular warmth of a place that has been used hard and cared for well. Then the room went quiet. Not because the food stopped sizzling, because he finally looked up. White suit, gold watch, controlled posture. The woman who had fired him in front of an entire boardroom stood just inside the entrance of the burger shop he now owned, looking at the full house around her with an expression she was working very hard to keep neutral. 3 months earlier, she had looked him in the eye across a conference table and said, "You'll never survive without this company." Now she was standing in his. The ticket above the flat top said, "Order up." The bun was toasting. The beef needed one more flip. Stanley looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. Then he looked back at the grill. He flipped the burger. He let the flames rise. He plated it with the same unhurried precision he brought to everything. The kind of precision that doesn't perform itself, that simply exists because the person doing the work has decided that the work deserves it. He set the plate on the pass. He looked up again. "Welcome," he said calmly. "What can I get you?" The kitchen kept moving. The room slowly filled back with noise. And Amber Stenfield, CEO of one of the largest fast casual burger franchises in the country, stood in a 40-seat neighborhood grill and did something she had not done in a very long time. She didn't know what to say. Cut to 3 months earlier. But before we go there, if this story already has you, subscribe right now. This channel tells stories that don't get told anywhere else. And drop a comment below. Where in the world are you watching from? I want to see how far this reaches. Because what Stanley Nicholas built in 3 months, with a broken freezer and a failing neighborhood grill and a daughter who designs chalkboard menus, that story deserves a full room. Let's go back to the beginning. The grill flames rose higher than usual when the door opened. Stanley Nicholas didn't look up at first. There were 15 tickets hanging above the flat top, grease popping, buns toasting, the lunch rush moving at the controlled velocity of a kitchen that knows exactly what it's doing. The room smelled like caramelized onions and charred beef and the particular warmth of a place that has been used hard and cared for well. Then the room went quiet. Not because the food stopped sizzling, because he finally looked up. White suit, gold watch, controlled posture. The woman who had fired him in front of an entire boardroom stood just inside the entrance of the burger shop he now owned, looking at the full house around her with an expression she was working very hard to keep neutral. 3 months earlier, she had looked him in the eye across a conference table and said, "You'll never survive without this company." Now she was standing in his. The ticket above the flat top said, "Order up." The bun was toasting. The beef needed one more flip. Stanley looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. Then he looked back at the grill. He flipped the burger. He let the flames rise. He plated it with the same unhurried precision he brought to everything. The kind of precision that doesn't perform itself, that simply exists because the person doing the work has decided that the work deserves it. He set the plate on the pass. He looked up again. "Welcome," he said calmly. "What can I get you?" The kitchen kept moving. The room slowly filled back with noise. And Amber Stenfield, CEO of one of the largest fast casual burger franchises in the country, stood in a 40-seat neighborhood grill and did something she had not done in a very long time. She didn't know what to say. Cut to 3 months earlier. But before we go there, if this story already has you, subscribe right now. This channel tells stories that don't get told anywhere else. And drop a comment below. Where in the world are you watching from? I want to see how far this reaches. Because what Stanley Nicholas built in 3 months, with a broken freezer and a failing neighborhood grill, and a daughter who designs chalkboard menus, that story deserves a full room. Let's go back to the beginning. The boardroom on the 14th floor of Stenfield Burger Group's corporate headquarters was the kind of room that had been designed to communicate finality. Long table, high-backed chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city with the particular arrogance of a view that reminded everyone in it exactly where power lived. The kind of room where decisions were not debated, they were delivered. Stanley Nicholas had sat in this room many times. He had never sat in it like this. There were 9 people at the table. Regional directors, the VP of operations, 2 members of the supply chain team, and at the far end, Amber Stenfield, in a white blazer with a coffee she hadn't touched, watching the presentation with the focused attention of a woman who had already made up her mind and was allowing the presentation to proceed as a courtesy. The slide on the screen showed 2 columns: current supplier, proposed supplier, cost per pound, protein content, fat ratio, shelf life, unit economics. The proposed supplier's numbers were better in every financial column. They were worse in every quality column, but the quality columns were not the ones highlighted. Derek Moss, the senior VP of supply chain, a man Stanley had understood within 6 months of meeting him to be the particular kind of corporate operator who protected margins the way other people protected principles. Click to the next slide. Projected annual savings of $4.2 million across the regional network, Derek said. Customer testing showed no statistically significant preference between current and proposed product in blind trials. Stanley looked at the blind trial data. He had been looking at it for 3 days. He had questions about the methodology, sample size, trial duration, the fact that the test had been conducted over a single meal rather than across repeated visits, which was how loyalty actually worked. He had submitted those questions in writing to Derek's office 2 days ago. They had not been addressed. Stanley, Amber's voice was even. You've reviewed the proposal. I have, he said. And your position? He looked at the slide. He looked at the 2 columns. He thought about the customers he had spent 11 years serving, the families who came in on Friday evenings, the workers who ate at the counter on their lunch breaks, the kids who knew the menu by heart. He thought about what they were actually being offered when they ordered a burger, and what they were owed, and what it meant to take something from someone without telling them. I can't sign off on this, he said. The room shifted. Not dramatically. Just the subtle atmospheric change of a space in which something expected has not occurred. Can't, Amber said. Or won't. Both, Stanley said. Derek set his pen down. The trials demonstrated. The trials tested 1 meal, Stanley said. Loyalty is built across dozens. If the product degrades, customers feel it before they can articulate it. They just stop coming back. He looked at Amber. We've spent 11 years building trust with these neighborhoods. This supplier saves us $4 million and costs us something we can't put on a slide. Amber looked at him for a long moment. The room was very quiet. We're not asking for your philosophy, Stanley, she said. We're asking for your signature. Then I can't give it, he said. Amber set her coffee down. She straightened the folder in front of her with one precise movement. She looked around the table, and then she looked back at Stanley with the expression of a woman who has made a decision and is now simply executing it. Then I think we're done here, she said. Derek, have HR process the separation paperwork today. She said it the way she said everything, cleanly, without heat, with the brisk efficiency of a person who has confused cruelty with competence for so long that she can no longer tell the difference. Stanley looked at her. He did not argue. He did not appeal to the other people at the table, none of whom met his eyes. He did not perform the outrage that the moment might have justified. He nodded once. He gathered his folder. He stood. Stanley. Amber's voice stopped him at the door. He turned. She looked at him with the particular expression of a person delivering what they believe is a practical truth. You're talented, but talent without adaptability doesn't survive in this industry. You won't last 6 months on your own. Stanley looked at her. We'll see, he said. He walked out. He took the elevator to his office on the 9th floor. He had a box. Not because he had anticipated this, but because he was an organized man, and organized men have boxes for the things that matter to them. The photograph of Amara on his desk, his father's recipe notebook, which he kept in the bottom drawer and had never shown anyone. His good pen. He packed them quietly. He carried the box through the lobby without stopping. He drove home through the city in the gray November afternoon, the kind of afternoon that makes everything look like the day after something. At a red light on Carpenter Street, he looked to his right. A narrow building, brick face, grease-darkened windows, a hand-painted sign barely visible beneath years of weather. Beneath it, taped inside the glass, "For sale." The light turned green. Stanley didn't move. The car behind him waited. He looked at the building, at the faded sign, at the grease-dark windows and the narrow door and the particular quality of a place that had served people once and been left behind. He thought about what Amber Stenfield had said. He thought about his daughter, who would be home from school in 2 hours. He thought about his father's recipe notebook in the box on the passenger seat. The car behind him tapped its horn. Gently, Stanley looked at the building one more time. Then he pulled over. He sat in the parked car for a long time, looking at the "For sale" sign in the window of a grill that nobody wanted, thinking about what it would cost, thinking about what it would mean, thinking about the difference between the two. The first rejection came on a Thursday. A form email. 3 sentences. "We appreciate your interest and will keep your application on file." Stanley read it at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning, while Amara's cereal sat getting soft across from him, and the news played quietly on the counter television, and the city outside did what cities do. Moved, indifferent, without reference to what was happening inside any particular kitchen on any particular morning. He marked it in his spreadsheet and sent the next application. By the end of the second week, he had sent 19 applications to regional operations roles at food service companies across the metro area. He had heard back from 4. 2 were form rejections. 1 was a phone screen that ended politely after 12 minutes when the recruiter asked why he had left Stenfield Burger Group, and Stanley told the truth. The 4th was a second interview that was canceled the morning it was scheduled, by email, with no rescheduled date offered. He understood what was happening. He didn't need anyone to explain it to him. He had spent 11 years inside the industry. He knew how information traveled, not through formal channels, not through reference calls, but through the lateral network of people who had worked at the same companies, attended the same conferences, eaten at the same tables. A word placed in the right conversation could travel further and faster than any press release, and the word that had been placed about Stanley Nicholas was not a complimentary one. He updated his spreadsheet. He sent more applications. By the end of the 3rd week, the number was 31. The responses had thinned to almost nothing. He had begun checking the inbox less frequently because checking it frequently had become its own kind of damage. He sat with the numbers instead. His savings, the mortgage, Amara's school fees, the monthly cost of the life he had built, line by line, which had seemed reasonable when a director's salary was arriving every 2 weeks, and now looked like a different kind of document entirely. He had 4 months, maybe 5 if he was careful. He was always careful. But careful had a limit. Amara found him at the kitchen table on a Sunday evening in the 4th week. She was 9 years old, and she had her mother's instinct for walking into a room and immediately locating the thing that needed attention. She stood in the doorway in her pajamas, hair still in the braids from Saturday, and looked at the spreadsheet on his laptop and the stack of bills beside it, and her father's face, which he had been careful to keep neutral all month, and which had, in the way that faces do when they have been working hard all day, relaxed into something closer to the truth. She sat across from him. "Are we okay?" she asked. Stanley closed the laptop. "We're working on it." "That's not what I asked." He looked at his daughter. She looked back at him with the particular patience of a child who has learned that adults sometimes need a moment before they can answer a real question honestly. "We have some decisions to make," he said, "about what comes next." "Because of the job?" "Because of the job." Amara was quiet for a moment. She pulled one knee up to her chest and rested her chin on it, thinking. "Why didn't you just say yes?" she asked. "To whatever they wanted, so they wouldn't have fired you." Stanley had been waiting for this question. And he had been waiting for it since the afternoon he drove home from the 14th floor with a box on his passenger seat and a for sale sign burning quietly in his peripheral vision. "You know how you draw the menu?" he said. She nodded. She designed the chalkboard menu at her grandmother's diner every Sunday. Careful lettering, small illustrations, the weekly specials in colored chalk. "Why do you draw it so carefully?" he asked. "You could just write the words." She frowned, like the answer was obvious. "Because people should know what they're getting. It should look like what it actually is." Stanley nodded. "They wanted me to serve people something that wasn't what it looked like," he said, "and charge them the same price as the real thing." Amara thought about that for a moment. "And you said no," she said. "I said no." She was quiet again. Then, "Did you know they would fire you?" "I thought they might. But you still said no." "Yeah," he said. "I still said no." Amara put her chin back on her knee and looked at the closed laptop. "Okay," she said finally. "So what are we going to do?" Stanley looked at his daughter. The braids, the pajamas, the entirely serious expression of a 9-year-old who has decided that whatever comes next, she is part of it. He reached into the folder beside the laptop. He pulled out a photograph he had printed 3 days ago. A narrow brick building on Carpenter Street. Grease-dark windows. A hand-painted sign weathered to near illegibility. He set it on the table between them. "This," he said. Amara looked at the photograph for a long time. "It needs work," she said. "A lot of work," Stanley agreed. "Can we fix it?" He looked at the photograph. He thought about the notebook in the box in his closet, his father's handwriting, the recipes that had been in the family for 2 generations, the burger that people had driven across 3 neighborhoods to eat, at a grill that had closed when his father's health gave out, and nobody had been able to hold it together after. "Yeah," he said. "I think we can." He bought it on a Tuesday morning for less than he expected, which should have been reassuring, and was instead the first indication of how much work the building actually required. The previous owner, a tired man named Gerald, who had been trying to sell the property for 14 months, handed Stanley the keys, with the particular relief of someone setting down something heavy. "Bones are good," Gerald said. "Everything else," he paused diplomatically, "you'll see." Stanley saw. The flat-top grill had a warped surface that would cook unevenly until it was replaced or refaced. The refrigeration unit in the back ran warm, cold enough to pass a casual inspection, not cold enough to safely hold fresh beef over a service period. The hood ventilation system needed cleaning so thoroughly that the fire suppression inspector who came on day 3 looked at it for a long moment, and then looked at Stanley and said, simply, "Schedule a full service before you put any flame under that." The floors were salvageable. The walls needed work. 2 of the prep tables were solid. One had a leg that had been repaired with materials that were not designed for the purpose. Stanley made a list. He always made a list. He worked from 7 in the morning until Amara got home from school. Then he worked again after she was asleep. He refinished the flat-top surface himself, watching instructional videos on his laptop, and then doing the work with the same methodical patience he had brought to every operational problem of his career. He replaced the seals on the refrigeration unit, cleaned the ventilation system over 2 full days, stripped and resealed the prep tables. He called in one favor from an old contact, a refrigeration technician who owed him something from 3 years back, and got the cooling unit properly calibrated. He did not call anyone else. At the end of the second week, he stood in the middle of the kitchen and looked at what he had and calculated what he needed to open properly. Fresh beef, real beef, the kind his father had used, sourced from the supplier 2 counties over, whose product he had tried to get Stenfield to adopt 3 years ago and been told was too expensive for the margin structure. He went home and opened the box in the closet. Underneath the recipe notebook wrapped in the cloth it had always been wrapped in, was his watch. Not expensive in the way that things are expensive when they are bought for expense. Expensive in the way that things are expensive when they are the last object a person gave you before they were no longer able to give you anything. His father's watch, 14 years on his wrist. He held it for a long time. Then he drove to the jeweler on Aldine Street and came home with enough to cover 3 weeks of fresh beef and the small supply of ingredients his father's recipe required, and nothing else. He put the receipt in the folder. He went back to the grill. Opening day was a Thursday. He had done what he could with the exterior. The windows clean, the door painted, the old hand-painted sign touched up with lettering that matched the original as closely as he could manage. Inside, 4 tables, a counter with 6 stools, the flat top gleaming under the kitchen lights, his father's recipe on the board above the grill, written in Amara's careful chalk lettering. She had drawn a small flame beside the name. He opened the door at 11. He stood behind the flat top and waited. At 11:22, a man in work boots and a concrete-dusted jacket came in and sat at the counter without looking at the menu. "What's good?" he asked. "Everything," Stanley said. The man smiled without committing to it. "I'll have a burger." Stanley put the beef on the grill. At 11:45, a woman with a stroller came in, looked at the menu board, looked at the counter, and sat at the table nearest the window. That was it. 2 customers. Stanley stood behind the flat top in the empty restaurant and listened to the beef sizzle and the baby make small sounds from the stroller, and the city move past the clean windows of a grill that nobody knew existed yet. He plated the burger. He set it on the counter. The man in the work boots took a bite. He stopped chewing for a moment. He looked at the burger. He looked at Stanley. "This is real," he said. "Yeah," Stanley said. The man looked at the burger again. "Where'd you come from?" "I've been here a while," Stanley said. He went back to the grill. Outside, the city continued, indifferent and unaware. Inside, the flat top held its heat, the way good things do. The man in the work boots came back on Friday. He brought 2 people with him, a woman from his crew and a younger man who Stanley would later learn was his nephew, recently arrived in the city and still calibrating to it. They sat at the counter without looking at the menu, the way the first man hadn't looked at the menu, because he had already told them what to order. 3 burgers, 1 with extra onions. Stanley cooked them the same way he had cooked the first one. Same temperature, same timing. Same attention to the moment when the fat rendered and the crust formed, and the beef became something more than its components. He had learned this from his father, who had learned it from his, and the knowledge lived in his hands the way real knowledge does, below the level of conscious instruction. The nephew ate half his burger and put it down and looked at it. "What's in this?" he asked. "Beef," Stanley said. "Salt, a few other things." "That's it? That's enough, if you do it right." The nephew picked the burger back up. He finished it in 4 bites. He looked at Stanley with the expression of someone who has just been given evidence that contradicts a long-held assumption. "I haven't had a burger that tasted like food in a long time," he said. Stanley nodded. "That's the idea." They left a tip that was larger than the bill. Stanley put it in the register and went back to the grill and stood there for a moment in the quiet of the afternoon, the flat top cooling, the kitchen smelling like caramelized onion and char, and felt something he hadn't felt in a month. Not hope exactly, something more structural than hope. The sense that the foundation was right. The first online review appeared 11 days after opening. Stanley didn't find it himself. Amara found it, doing the homework she was supposed to be doing on his laptop while he cleaned the grill after close. She came to the kitchen doorway with the laptop open and the expression of someone delivering significant news. "Dad," she said, "somebody wrote about us." He read it over her shoulder. 5 stars. 41 words. "I drove past this place 4 times before I stopped. Best decision I've made this month. The burger tastes like someone actually cares what goes into it. I don't know who's running this grill, but they understand something most places have forgotten. Stanley read it twice. He handed the laptop back to Amara. Do your homework, he said. Did you see the rating? She said. I saw it. 5 stars, Dad. Homework, he said. But when she went back to the table, he stood at the flat top for a long moment, with his hand resting on the cool metal surface, and allowed himself, briefly and without performance, to feel what it meant. By the end of the 3rd week, the reviews had accumulated the way early things accumulate when they are genuinely good, not in a flood, but in a steady, organic progression that doesn't have the shape of marketing, because it isn't marketing. It's just people telling other people the truth about an experience. The words that kept appearing, real, honest, tastes like something didn't expect, came back. Amara updated the chalkboard menu every Monday morning before school. She had developed a system: weekly specials in yellow, permanent items in white, a small illustrated border that changed with the season. November had been leaves. December had a careful row of small flames along the bottom edge, which Stanley had not requested, but found he didn't want to remove. She had started adding something new, a line at the top of the board, changed weekly, in her small, deliberate lettering. He hadn't noticed it until a customer pointed it up. What does that say? The customer asked. Stanley looked up at the board. In yellow chalk, in Amara's handwriting. Made with something that can't be faked. He looked at his daughter, who was organizing the condiment station with her back to him. Amara, he said. Homework's done, she said, without turning around. He looked at the board for another moment. He left the line where it was. The community formed the way communities form around things that are genuinely useful, not because anyone organized it, but because the thing kept being there, kept being what it said it was, and people kept finding reasons to return. The man in the work boots, whose name was Darnell, started bringing his whole crew on Wednesdays. A group of women from the church 2 blocks over claimed the corner table on Thursday lunches. A retired postal worker named August came in every morning for coffee and sat at the counter end and talked to whoever sat down beside him. And because he was the kind of man who talked to everyone with equal genuine interest, he became an accidental greeter, the person new customers encountered first, who made them feel like they had arrived somewhere rather than merely stopped. Stanley learned their names. He remembered their orders after the second visit. He asked about the things they mentioned: the daughter's recital, the job interview, the apartment search. He did not do this as a business strategy. He did it because his father had done it, and because it was the right way to treat people who were choosing to spend their money and their time in a place he was responsible for. The grill held 40 seats. By week 5, there was a wait on Friday evenings. By week 7, the wait was on Thursdays too. Stanley hired 2 people, a cook named Reginald, who had 20 years in commercial kitchens and had been out of work for 4 months, and a front-of-house person named Destiny, who was 19 and had the natural warmth of someone who genuinely enjoyed being around people, which could not be trained into a person and which Stanley recognized immediately. He paid them what the job was worth, not what the margin structure suggested. What the job was worth. The food blogger arrived on a Tuesday in week 8 without announcing herself, which was how she always arrived, and sat at the counter and ordered the burger and the seasonal side and a coffee, and wrote 700 words about it that evening that were published the following morning. The piece was not a review in the traditional sense. It was closer to an observation about what it meant to encounter a place that understood the difference between feeding people and serving them. She mentioned the chalkboard. She mentioned August at the end of the counter. She mentioned that she had asked the owner where he had learned to cook, and he had said from my father, and left it there, without elaboration, and that the brevity of it told her something important. The piece was shared 400 times by noon. By 3 o'clock, Stanley had a line outside the door for the first time. Amara, who came in after school on Tuesdays, looked at the line from the kitchen doorway, and then looked at her father. "We're going to need more beef," she said. "Already ordered," he said. She nodded, satisfied, and went to update the chalkboard. It was around this time that Marcus came in. Marcus had been a shift supervisor at the Stenfield franchise location on Whitfield Avenue for 6 years. A solid, careful man who had worked under Stanley's regional oversight and who had sent a brief, formal message of condolence when the news of Stanley's departure circulated through the operational network. The kind of message people send when they want to say more than the professional situation allows. He came in on a Wednesday evening and sat at the counter and ordered without looking at the menu and ate quietly for a while before saying anything. "You left us in a bad spot," he said finally. "Not as an accusation, as a fact." "I know," Stanley said. "The new beef." Marcus stopped. He looked at the burger in front of him. He looked at the grill. "People notice. They don't say it. Exactly. But the regulars, I can see it. They come in less. Or they come in and they order, but there's something different about how they eat it." He set the burger down, like they're eating out of habit instead of wanting to. Stanley was quiet. "How's the regional sales?" he asked. Marcus looked at him. "You didn't hear that from me," he said. "But we're down 11% from last quarter. 3 locations are under review." He picked up the burger again. "Corporate is telling us it's market conditions." Stanley nodded. Marcus took a bite. "It's not market conditions," Marcus said. "No," Stanley said. "It's not." Amber Stenfield heard about the grill, the way executives hear about things that are happening below their line of vision, through the distorted, delayed signal of data that has passed through several interpretive layers before it reaches the room where decisions are made. The first signal was the regional sales report. 11% decline. 3 locations under performance review. Victor attributed it to market saturation and increased delivery app competition, and Amber had accepted that framing because it was the available framing and she had 18 other things requiring her attention. The second signal was a comment in an investor call, a minor shareholder who mentioned, almost parenthetically, that he had heard from a colleague about a neighborhood grill somewhere in the regional footprint that seemed to be drawing customers who had historically been franchise regulars. "Where?" Amber asked. The investor didn't know exactly. Somewhere on the south side. Small place. Apparently quite good. Amber looked at Victor after the call. Victor looked at his notes. "I'll find out," he said. The third signal was the blog post, which someone on the communications team flagged and which Amber read in full in her car before walking into a board meeting. She read it twice. She looked at the photograph that accompanied it. A narrow room, a chalkboard menu with a line of small flames along the bottom, a counter with a man visible behind it who was facing the grill and not the camera. She could not see his face. She didn't need to. She knew the posture. She had watched it walk out of her boardroom 3 months ago. She closed her phone. She walked into the board meeting. She sat through 2 hours of operational review with the particular stillness of a person who is thinking about something other than what is being discussed. After the meeting, she told her assistant to clear Thursday afternoon. "Where are you going?" the assistant asked. Amber looked at the photograph on her phone one more time. "To see something I should probably understand," she said. She put the phone away. She walked back to her office. Outside her window, the city spread out in all directions, legible and ordered and full of things happening below the line of vision. She had stopped looking at some of them. She was beginning to understand what that had cost. Amber Stenfield had walked into a lot of rooms in her career. Rooms designed to intimidate. Rooms designed to impress. Rooms she had built herself, floor by floor, with the specific intention of making anyone who entered them understand exactly whose room it was. She had never walked into a room like this one. 40 seats, every one of them full. The smell of onions and char and coffee, a chalkboard above the counter with careful yellow lettering and a small illustrated border of flames, and beneath it, in smaller writing, "Made with something that can't be faked." She stood just inside the door and let it happen. The way a room notices a person who doesn't belong in it, before it can name why. A woman at the corner table glanced up first, then the man beside her. Then, in the particular ripple that moves through a crowded space when something shifts, more heads turned, until the low hum of 40 people eating lunch had thinned into something quieter. Not silence, not yet, but close to it. Amber recognized none of them. They recognized her. Not her name, her posture, her white blazer, the kind of woman who does not walk into a place like this by accident, and the kind of stillness that settled over a room when people understood, without being told, that they were about to watch something. At the counter, an older man in a faded cap, the one everyone seemed to know, the one who'd greeted 3 separate customers by name before she'd even reached the door, set down his coffee and watched her with open, unhurried curiosity. Behind the flat top, Stanley hadn't stopped moving. He plated a burger. He set it on the pass. He wiped his hands on the towel at his waist, unhurried, and only then did he look up and let his eyes find her across the room. 2 seconds. That was all he gave it. Then he looked back at the grill, because there were still tickets hanging, still beef that needed turning, still a lunch service that did not pause for anyone, CEO or otherwise. The room exhaled. Amber crossed to the counter. She sat on the one open stool, between August and a woman with a stroller, and for a moment she simply looked around, at the awards taped to the wall that weren't corporate plaques, but handwritten thank you notes, framed. At a young girl, maybe 9, moving between tables with a pitcher of water, greeting a man at table 6 by name, asking a woman at table 3 how her daughter's recital had gone. At the full house her old company's sales reports had been quietly bleeding into. "I didn't expect this," she said, when Stanley finally came to stand across the counter from her. "I did," he said. He said it without triumph, without the satisfaction she might have braced for. He said it the way he'd said everything to her, 3 months ago and now, flatly, factually, like a man reporting weather. She looked at the menu, chalked above his head. She looked at the girl, his daughter she assumed, though nobody had said so, laughing with a customer at the far table. "You've done well," Amber said. "I've done what I always did," Stanley said. "Nobody's stopping me from doing it right anymore." Amber absorbed that. She had prepared several openings on the drive over, and she discarded all of them now, sitting in the small heat of the room, in front of the man she had told he wouldn't survive. "I can write you a check today," she said, "for the building, the equipment, the recipes, the brand, whatever you want to call it. Enough that you'd never need to work another day if you didn't want to." Stanley didn't answer immediately. He turned the beef on the flat top. Somewhere behind him, Reginald called out an order, and Destiny answered it, and the kitchen kept its rhythm around the conversation happening at the counter, indifferent to it, the way a living thing is indifferent to the observer studying it. "No," Stanley said. "You haven't heard the number." "I don't need to." Amber's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly, the reflex of a woman unused to a door closing before she'd finished describing what was behind it. "Then let me put something else in front of you," she said. "Come back, not to where you were. Above it, Chief Operations Officer, full authority over sourcing, over quality standards, over supplier relationships. You'd answer to no one but the board. You could fix everything you thought was broken, from the inside, at scale. 40 seats is a nice story, Stanley. It's not a legacy." Around them, a few of the nearer tables had stopped pretending not to listen. Stanley set down his spatula. "You're offering me my old job," he said, "with a better title, because you finally believe I was right. I'm offering you the chance to matter to more than 40 seats. I matter to 40 seats, Stanley said. Every one of them. That was never the part I was missing. Amber sat back slightly. She glanced once around the room, at August watching her with his coffee, at Darnell's crew at the window table, at Amara refilling water glasses with the unhurried competence of a child who had been trusted with something real, and something in her expression shifted, just slightly, from calculation toward something closer to recognition. She tried once more. A franchise deal, then, she said. We license the concept. Your name, your recipe, your standards. Written into the contract. Enforceable. Non-negotiable. You'd oversee quality control across every location personally. We'd fund the expansion. You'd never have to compromise again. And you'd reach more people than this room could hold in 100 years. The room had gone properly quiet now. Even the flat top seemed to sizzle more softly. Stanley looked at her for a long moment. You still think this is about reach, he said. It never was. It was about whether the person behind the counter actually cares what happens after the food leaves the pass. He gestured, briefly, at the room around them. Darnell, August, Amara, the chalkboard, the weight line that had started forming again outside the window. I didn't build this to get bigger. I built it to be honest, at the size I could actually hold. He picked the spatula back up. You showed me I don't need permission, he said. Not from a boardroom, not from a title, not from you. The words landed and stayed, and for a moment, nobody in the room moved. Amber sat very still on the stool, in her white blazer, in the middle of a room that had made its choice about her without needing to say anything at all. So that's no, she said. To all of it. That's no, Stanley said. To all of it. He turned back to the grill. The flames rose. The room, slowly, began breathing again. Amber didn't leave right away. She sat at the counter for a while after the refusal, in the particular stillness of a person recalibrating in public, which is its own kind of exposure. The room had gone back to its rhythm around her. Forks against plates, the low murmur of Thursday lunch conversation, Amara's small footsteps between tables. But she remained apart from it, a white blazer in a room that had already decided who belonged. Stanley worked the grill. He didn't ignore her. He simply let the silence be what it was, because he had learned, over 11 years and then 3 months, that some things didn't need to be filled. Eventually she spoke again, quieter this time. Why does it matter this much to you? She asked. The quality, the sourcing. I've built a company on the idea that people don't actually notice the difference, that consistency and price beat some abstraction, like authenticity, 9 times out of 10. And you've built, she gestured at the room, this, on the opposite bet, and you won. Stanley plated a burger. He set it in front of her without being asked. Try it, he said. She hesitated, then did. She chewed slowly. She set it down and looked at it the way people had been looking at it for 2 months now, like evidence. My father used to say, food is a promise, Stanley said. You tell somebody what they're getting, and then you give them exactly that, every time, whether anyone's watching or not. That's it. That's the whole business. He wiped the flat top down, unhurried. You changed the promise and kept charging the same price. People don't need a food science degree to feel that. They just feel cheated, and they don't always know why. Amber looked at the burger. She looked at the room. Darnell's table, August at the counter, the little girl now standing at her father's elbow refilling the napkin dispenser with the seriousness of someone who understood this was real work. I told you that you wouldn't survive without us, she said. I remember. I was wrong. You were, Stanley said. Then, after a beat, not about everything. You built something big. That's not nothing. You just built it on a promise you stopped keeping, and you promoted the people who told you that was fine. Amber didn't argue. For a woman who had spent a career being the person who delivered the final word in every room she entered, she found herself, for the second time that day, without one. What would you do, she asked finally, if it were yours? All of it. Not this. She gestured at the 40 seats. The whole network. 200 locations. Investors. Margins that actually have to answer to somebody. Stanley considered the question honestly, because it deserved that. I wouldn't burn it down, he said. I'd fix the promise. Go back to real ingredients, even if it costs more. Tell the truth about what people are eating. Pay your crews enough that they want to be there, because the people making the food are the first line of whether it's made with care, and you can't fake that with a training manual. He looked at her directly. It'll cost you margin in year 1. It'll cost you nothing that matters in year 5, because you'll have customers who trust you again, instead of customers who are one bad meal from leaving. Amber sat with that. She didn't promise anything. Stanley didn't ask her to. There was no handshake, no music swelling, no clean resolution offered or accepted. Just a woman in a white blazer absorbing, at a Formica counter in a 40-seat grill, that the man she'd once dismissed had just handed her the only actual strategy anyone had given her all year. For free, without being asked twice. She stood. She reached for her wallet. "It's on the house," Stanley said. "I can pay." "I know," he said. "But you didn't come here for the burger." Amber looked at him for a long moment. Something in her face, the controlled, decisive architecture she'd worn into the room, had softened into something closer to the woman underneath it, the one who had built a company because she believed, once, that she was solving a real problem, before the solving had curdled into simply winning. "Thank you, Stanley," she said. It was the first time she had used his name all afternoon. She walked to the door. She paused there, the way people do when they feel a room watching them leave, and she looked back once, not at Stanley, but at the chalkboard above the grill, at the small illustrated flames along its border, at the line written in a child's careful yellow lettering. "Made with something that can't be faked." She read it twice. Then she walked out into the afternoon light, and the door swung shut behind her, and the bell above it rang once into a room that had already moved on without her. Amara watched her go from the register. "Is she going to be okay?" she asked. Stanley looked at the door for a moment. "I think she's going to try something new," he said. "That's usually how okay starts." Amara nodded like this made complete sense, because to her, it did. She went back to refilling napkins. The evening rush came the way it came every Thursday now, steady, then sudden, the weight growing outside the window as the light went gold and then blue over Carpenter Street. Darnell's crew took the corner table. August held his usual seat at the counter's end, holding court with a young couple who'd wandered in for the first time and left 40 minutes later, already sounding like regulars. Reginald worked the second station Stanley had finally been able to afford, and Destiny moved between tables with the particular grace of someone who had found the job she was supposed to have. Amara stood at the pass, next to the small brass bell Stanley had bought in the second month, the one she rang every time an order was ready. Not because the kitchen needed the signal, but because she liked the sound, and because customers had started to smile when they heard it, the way people smile at things that are simple and unfaked. She rang it now, for a family of 4 at table 2. The sound carried over the noise of the room. Forks, conversation, the low laughter of Darnell's crew at something Reginald had said, and out toward the window, where the hand-painted sign glowed faintly under the string lights Stanley had put up in November. Quality first. Behind the flat top, the flames rose steady and orange, the way they always did at the height of the dinner rush, licking up around the beef, filling the small kitchen with heat and smoke and the smell of something real. Stanley flipped the next order. He didn't think about the boardroom on the 14th floor, or the woman in the white blazer, or the $4 million he had refused to sign for. He thought about the sound of the bell and his daughter's laugh carrying over it, and the particular, unglamorous, permanent satisfaction of a promise kept. One burger, one customer, one honest plate at a time. The room filled with noise and warmth and the sound of people who had found, in a 40-seat grill on a street nobody important ever drove down, something they hadn't known they were looking for. The flames rose higher than usual when the door opened again. This time, Stanley didn't look up right away. He didn't need to. He already knew what was walking in. His people. If this story reminded you that doing the right thing is never wasted, even when no one's watching, hit subscribe. This channel is built on stories like Stanley's, people who stayed honest when it cost them everything. and built something real because of it. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever refused to compromise on something, even when it was hard? I read every single one.